Okay. I was talking about just around the beginning of the Second World War, in the early 40s.
Mm-hmm.
On December the 7th, 1941, of course, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And we had two of my daddy's brothers, Woodrow and D.P., they were on the USS Arizona and they were killed. And when they notified our family, of course, my dad, he immediately went down and signed up to be in the Army.
Oh, I thought he was drafted.
No, I don't think so. Anyhow, in order for him to go away in the Army, we had to move to Cottondale, Alabama, where my granddaddy, Jones, lived. And he had a little sharecropper's house, a little 3-room house next door to the big house. And we moved in there. It was, at that time, 4 kids and my mom. And, of course, the farm where my granddaddy had was out in the country. There was no easy way to go any place because we didn't have a car, and so we were dependent on other people. And one of the things we depended on was what people referred to as a rolling store. It was an old vehicle, an old truck that had been converted. And it had essential stuff in it, and it would come by once a week. And you could buy stuff off of it. You could get some kerosene if you needed it. You could get salt and sugar and flour. Basically, the commodities that you really needed, they would have on there. They might they didn't have any perishables that I recall. They might have a little bit of hard candy, maybe your mama would get a little bag of hard candy and the kids would have, a little hard candy or something like that when the rolling store man came by. But we would all be excited when they came, and my mom would go down and get stuff off the store. And that would be once a week, pretty much. And of course she wouldn't get much because we didn't have much money. And that worked out pretty good, except when the government check came. Because when my dad was in the Army, of course, my mom got an allotment check to help, offset some of our expenses. So we would have to go to town. And early on, my grandfather, they had a pickup truck, an old truck. And Aunt Ruby would drive, and my mom could go to town with him and get to go to the bank and get the check cash, and then that would give her a little bit of money, and she could pick up whatever we need there, and she'd have a little bit of money for the rolling store. Maybe if the kids needed, socks or shoes or something like that, she could get them while she's in town. But that worked out pretty good till probably about a year before the war was over. Of course, we all worked. We were real small, but we would go and pick up scrap iron or work, in the barn or do anything we could to, kind of help out, get firewood, because we use a big fireplace. And I remember it was a real cold day. And we would gather around that old fireplace because that little 3-room house was not it wasn't insulated at all. And the inside of it, I don't even believe, it seems to me like it probably wasn't even sealed. So it was pretty windy. And I remember one real cold day, we were gathering firewood, and my brother, he was a little bit different. And of course, my dad was a coal miner before he went into the service. And so he had some coal mining supplies around there. And we were outside, my mother and I think maybe Sarah, my older sister, and we were cutting up wood and bringing it in the house to put in the fire. And the fire wasn't good enough for my brother. He gathered up stuff in the house, anything it would burn, and he threw it in the fire. Well, you know, some of the mining supplies that my daddy had was a dynamite cap. And while we were outside, my sister Faye, she was right up next to the fire. My brother threw that bunch of stuff that he gathered up in the house in the fire. And when it ignited, that dynamite cap exploded. And when it did, it hit my sister Faye in the side, and you know, she had a pretty serious wound.
She was the youngest at the time.
Yeah.
What was she, 3 or something? Or?
She was 2 years old, I think.
2 years old.
Anyhow, we all run in the house, and there's Faye. She's bleeding, and my mother, she gathers her up, and of course we don't have any way to go to the doctor. If we did have a way to go to the doctor, there was no doctor to go to, no money to pay the doctor with. So, you know, you just had to do the best you could and hope for the best. So she gathered her up, and she took her and she got a bunch of lard. And she smeared that lard all over her wound, you know, to stop the bleeding. And then she wrapped her up good with whatever, tore up a sheet or something, you know, to make some kind of a bandage, and wrapped it around her several times, and put her to bed, you know, and hope for the best. And as it turned out, she survived. Now, she probably was less injured than my brother after all was said and done. He got a little punishment for it. But that worked out okay until one day Ruby was milking the cows, and it had rained and it was kind of muddy, and the barn was across the road, and my brother and I, we were throwing mud balls at one another in the road. And Ruby was coming across the road carrying a bucket of milk. And my brother, he threw a mud ball at me, and it went in that bucket of milk. And it made Ruby mad, and she picked up something and threw it at him. I'm sure she didn't mean to hurt him or anything, but she hit him right in the head with it, and it made a big gash in his head, and he's bleeding down his face. And of course he runs in the house and tells my mother and my older sister, Sarah, that Ruby had threw a rock and hit him in the head. Well, my sister, the redheaded one, she was high-tempered anyway, and she runs over to my grandma's house, and my grandma was on the porch there washing dishes because they had a screened-in porch. And she grabs my grandmother by the hair of the head and snatches her out into the yard. And you know, my grandmother was pretty old, didn't get around to it, but I don't even know how old she was at that time. Probably, I felt like she was real old, but you know, she probably wasn't. Of course, when that happened, all hell broke loose. You know, Ruby came out, my granddaddy came out, they ran out there and they were chasing after Sarah, and Sarah runs back to the house. And they're running after her, yelling and screaming. My mother sees what's going on, and she comes out on the front porch, and she stops them. And they're really hostile at that time. And my granddaddy, he runs up on the porch, comes up the steps, you know, and the porch was off the ground, maybe three feet or something like that. He runs up on the porch, and my mother, she picks up a rocking chair and hits him.
Well, this is Granddad Jones, not Ken, right?
Yeah. and knocks him off the porch. Well, you know, of course, everybody's yelling and they're trying to get at my mother, and my mother, she gets the gun and she runs them all in the house. And after that, we were not able to get any transportation. When my mother's checks come, we didn't have any way of getting to the store to get the checks cashed or go to the bank, because all communications between the two households had been cut off at that time. We couldn't go over there, they couldn't come over here, you know, and they had all of the victuals and stuff, but you know, they farmed and all that, so it become a pretty tense time for that last year that we lived there. And so we would have to walk. Now, we could walk to Colon or we could walk to Cottondale, but it was about 5 miles each way. And my mother would have to take us kids because we were all too young to leave at home by ourselves. And can you imagine walking down a dirt road when you got to go to get a check cashed, and you got to walk 5 miles, get a check cashed, buy a few victuals, and then you got to walk back home. That's 10 miles for kids that are, you know, my sister, she probably wasn't no more than, she was probably born in 30s. She might have been 8 or 9 years old, maybe 10 years old, and my brother, he might have been 6 years old. I was probably 4, and Faye was probably 2. And she's got to herd this group of young kids all that way. You know, we'd walk, and then we'd get to go to Mr. Foster's store or go to Cottondale, and they would cash a check, and that's the only way she could get any money, even for the rolling store or anything like that. So the last year that we lived in that little sharecropper's house was pretty unpleasant, especially for my mother, because we never did get it patched up during that time. And then when my dad, he finally got out of the military and he came home, well, he moved us from there to Vance, and that's how we wound up living in Vance. And eventually my mother and you know, my granddaddy Jones and family, eventually, you know, they got everything. Time healed a lot of wounds, and they got everything patched up. But that was a pretty tough time. What do you think about World War II? We had fractions of the World War II right there in Cottondale, Alabama. You can cut it off now.
Well, I have a quick question now that the regular program is over. Did you want to talk about your latest invention, or are you thinking about patenting that, or you got to give it more thought? Or
what is it? Which one is that?
Well, I'm not talking about my grandmother's tricycle, which has a motor on it now and is run by a belt drive, and I'm not talking about that hitching post kitchen that you created.
Or what about that bazooka I got out?
Yeah, that plastic bottle rocket fire machine. And I'm not talking about those, or even the latest one, that Murphy bed style workbench. But I mean, you're always inventing stuff. You know, when I was a kid, my desk was made out of cardboard.
Oh yeah. We made do with what materials were handy for us.
But you were talking about the California wildfires.
I've given some thought to that. I need to kind of refine that idea. I think that's a good idea, but at this point in time, I need to give it a little bit more thought before I put the thing out there. It probably would be something that would work. You need some capital to put it together, because it's what it is trying to prevent all of these homes from being torched by these wildfires, and trying to figure out a way to do it. And I'm trying to come up with an idea with that, and A lot of times my ideas don't work, but I never own up to them if they don't work. But I've got a few right here that work a little bit, like my bottle rocket and the motor on the bicycle.
I remember you showed me one that I think you pitched to Budweiser because it had Budweiser logo on it. It was a temporary cooler for a case of beer made out of cardboard, and it was wax cardboard.
I still got it. It's here. You know, I never did go out and sell it, but yeah, I was planning on putting it in liquor store or in places where they sell beer. Like here in Mississippi, they don't sell beer in the liquor store. In Alabama, I don't think they sell beer in the liquor store, but it's a corrugated cooler that you can put a 6-pack of beer and some ice in, and it won't leak. It doesn't have any holes or any corners or anything like that. But at this point in time, I've still got it. I haven't done anything with it, and probably won't. But anyhow, I'll talk about that some later time.
You had a similar one for corpses, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I didn't get too many complaints about that one.
Not by the users, anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk to you later.